Hello, my name is Christopher Scott from the Biblical Leadership blog at christopherscottblog.com, and today I'm going to talk to you about how believers should live as citizens of heaven based on the text of Philippians 1:27 through 30. So the past month or two I've been doing this series going through the book of Philippians, studying Paul's message to the believers in Philippi and seeing what are some of the practical things that we can learn and apply to our lives as regular everyday people and as leaders. And today is more of a general believing message or general message for most believers, regardless if they serve in leadership in an organization. So let's go ahead and go through it. So I'm going to read the text, Philippians chapter 1, 27 through 30. I'm reading through from the New Living Translation. Paul writes, "Above all, you must live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourselves in a manner worthy of the good news about Christ. Then, whether I come to see you again or only hear about you, I will know that you are standing together with one spirit and one purpose, fighting together for the faith which is the good news. Don't be intimidated in any way by your enemies. This will be a sign to them that they are going to be destroyed and that you are going to be saved, even by God himself. For you have been given not only the privilege of trusting in Christ, but also the privilege of suffering for him. You have seen my struggle in the past, and you know that I am still in the midst of it." That's Philippians 1:27 through 30, Paul's message to the believers in Philippi. So in this passage, Paul just talked about previously about his life for Christ and how he wants to go to heaven and be with Christ, but he also wants to stay on earth and serve the Philippians. And then here he gives a heading for the Philippians. He says, "Live as citizens of heaven, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel." And this statement, live as citizens of heaven, kind of serves as a heading for the next several sections in Paul's letter. So he says, live as citizens of heaven in Philippians 1:27, and then in 1:28 through 30, he talks about suffering in the faith. And then in Philippians 2:1 through 4, he talks about focusing on others. In Philippians 2:5 through 11, he talks about having the same attitude as Christ. And then in Philippians 2:18 through 2:12 through 18, he talks about how believers should shine brightly for Christ. So here that we just read is Philippians 1:27. Paul kind of gives the heading, "Live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel." So live as citizens of heaven, and then suffer in the faith, focus on others, have the same attitude as Christ, and then shine brightly for Christ, are the four reasons or four ways that we live as citizens of heaven. And so Paul starts that out here by saying, above all, or at all costs, live as citizens of heaven, here in Philippians 1:27. And the word that he uses is the Greek word politeomai, which means live as a citizen. And Paul uses this word strategically here when he talks about how these Philippian believers live in Philippi. They're citizens of Rome in Philippi, yet they're also citizens of heaven. So Paul kind of takes this word that's only used one other time in the New Testament, politeomai, and he says, you should live as citizens of heaven. So Paul is saying, while your citizenship is here on earth, in the Roman government, in the city of Philippi, you need to conduct your manner worthy of the gospel as a citizen of heaven. So Paul says, live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel. Then he continues on that you need to contend. He says, above all, live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel. I know that when I come and see you and hear about you, that you are standing together in one purpose. So when he talks about standing together, this has the idea of contending or struggling together for a common purpose or a common goal. And it's often, sometimes people see some of the athletic imagery of Paul's day being brought in here. That it's carries the idea of athletes or soldiers competing as one man for a common goal. So he says, live as citizens of heaven, conduct yourselves in a manner, contend for the faith, and stand for the faith. Then he continues on in Philippians 1:28. Paul writes, don't be intimidated in any way by your enemies. This will be a sign to them that they are going to be destroyed, but you are going to be saved, even by God himself. So when Paul writes here, don't be intimidated, this is the word picture, right? The idea of a scared horse or a frightened horse or a timid horse, right? So don't be intimidated, but instead, remember that those people and their work is a sign of their destruction. It's legal proof based on the facts that they are headed for destruction. Then Paul writes in 129, for you have been given not only the privilege of trusting in Christ, but also the privilege of suffering for him. So you've been given the privilege of trusting in Christ, but you also have been given the privilege of suffering for him. And I like Max Anders' comment here where he says, adversity is a part of the Christian life and should come as no surprise. Those who follow Christ should expect opposition. Believers have two privileges, to believe in him and to suffer for him. Both are integral parts of Christian living. So, Paul says, live as citizens of heaven. Don't worry about the people who are doing evil, because that's a sign of their destruction. But instead, you should suffer in your faith, because just as you were chosen to believe in Christ, you also have been chosen to suffer for him. And then Paul concludes this little section where he says, we are in this struggle together. You have seen my struggle in the past, and you know that I am still in the midst of it. In the midst of it is the times Paul had experienced persecution in the past and been imprisoned, and the current circumstances that Paul is in at the time of writing this letter is he is most likely in prison in Rome in 60 to 63 AD under the Emperor Nero there. So just as I am in a struggle, Paul says, you too should understand and be okay with being in a struggle. So this has been a brief study of Philippians chapter 1, verse 27 through verse 30, talking about how believers are supposed to live as citizens of heaven. And the way that they do that here is by suffering in their faith, that throughout their circumstances, whatever happens, they have been chosen to suffer in their faith and to proclaim the good news. My name is Christopher Scott. I appreciate you tuning in for this video about the Bible and leadership. If you want to learn more about the Bible and leadership, you can visit my blog at christopherscottblog.com. Thanks again. I'll talk to you soon.